So let's talk about the let keyword. Now, let is a new feature, as is const in the next video, but let was introduced in ES 2015, or ES6, which we learned about at the beginning of this course as well. Now, there isn't too much difference between let, var, and const, but we're going to explore them to make sure that we know the differences and the key differences between them. Now, the main difference between var and let is what we call scoping. Now, a var is technically scoped to its nearest function block, and you may have heard this term called block scope, and that's where the let keyword comes into play. Now, let has this magical power that if it happens to be inside of a block scope, it is now inaccessible, whereas a var is function scoped, so we can't access it outside of the function or that global environment. Now, these behaviors will become more apparent as we continue, and all that knowledge that you learned in the previous video about var, you can now pass that along to the let keyword, so you can almost imagine that they're almost the exact same. Now, what we'll do inside our script tag, we'll create one variable called a using the var keyword, and we'll assign it the value of 1, 2, 3. What we'll do underneath here is using the let keyword, we'll assign a second variable and give it 4, 5, 6 as the value. Now, the interesting piece, if we go ahead and console log A, we can duplicate and console log B. So first step is to log both of these out. Now, the interesting piece is if we were to wrap this inside what we call a block and hit save, we then see 1, 2, 3. Now, I mentioned blocks, and you may have heard the term block scoping before. So here we are essentially creating a block scope, and you can see here that we now get an uncaught reference error, a runtime error, saying that B is not defined. So here we have this var keyword, and even outside of the block, we can still get the value, whereas inside of a block here, using the let keyword of B, that is completely inaccessible. Now, if we were to move this console logs inside of these, they then print out those initial values that we expected to. So you can think of the let keyword as a special variable declaration, and it's typical that we would favor the let keyword over var. Now, you must know var because it's the building block, the first thing that we should write when it comes to building a new JavaScript project, so it makes sense to start with var. However, it's not as commonly used as it was with the introduction of the super powerful let and the upcoming const keyword we'll visit in the next video. Now, one more interesting thing about this let keyword, let's go ahead and do let a equals 1, 2, 3. So we learned before that with our var keyword, we could actually access the variable up here. Now, with let, this is slightly different. So before we actually save this, I'll change this to a var so we can see that undefined value, and we'll go ahead and change it back to let. Now, this is a really interesting and a very useful behavior, is that we get more of a stricter variable in a sense that we can no longer reference it before it is in fact defined, which I personally prefer this, which is why we should favor using let over the var keyword. Now, apart from these two differences, so one, we have this reference error. So if we try and access the let keyword before it's initialized, and you can see that they are very specific in the wording of this error initialization. If we try and access it before, it's then going to throw a runtime error and no further code is going to be executed. And of course, that second difference of the block scoping, we demonstrated with the var keyword that we could access that value outside of the block scope, but we couldn't with the let keyword. Now, things that create block scope, you'll see as we continue through this course, we have these things called loops, and here we're showing you the for loop. We have conditional statements, and the common thing here is they are creating this new block here. So any variables that we create inside of here will be scoped to either the if statement or the for loop itself. Now, if you've been using JavaScript for a long time, you'll notice that this is actually a really good behavior, and we can create new variables inside of these block scopes which don't leak out into the rest of the functions. So with that information in mind, let's jump ahead into learning about const.